that society continues to perpetuate in the character of Princess Fiona. She is the damsel in distress, held captive in a tower, guarded by a fire-breathing dragon, waiting to be rescued by her handsome Prince Charming, who will ride up on this white horse, dressed in shining armor, drawn with a sword, and carry poor defenseless Fiona off to freedom, creating a loving bond between them that will last through eternity. Everyone's supposed to go, oh. As a society, we continue to teach our children this theme about romance. But what happens when that romance, over time, butts heads with the reality of life? The reality is, romance is a fleeting feeling. The Apostle Paul is trying to teach the church in Corinth that there is a deeper way as practitioners of Christ we are to live into. That is the practice of living through love. In this chapter, known as the love chapter, Paul describes the behaviors and attributes of what love looks like. Love is large and increasingly patient. It's gentle and consistently kind to all. Love celebrates honesty and is a safe shelter. Then he goes and talks about the way that love is by saying what it is not. Love is not jealous of others' successes and good fortunes. It does not inflate one's self-importance, does not traffic in shame and disrespect or seek its own honor. Love is slow to anger, slow to take offense. Love does not delight in what is wrong. Love never stops believing the best for others, and love never takes failure as defeat. It never gives up. Sweet, wonderful words, aren't they? Sounds good on paper, but that's not practical, Pastor. It's not real. In practice, it may seem true, but in that statement of it's not real, does not that speak about failure, of giving up on love? In my discussion group with the ministers down in Hastings that I meet with once a week, one of the pastors helped me broaden my horizon in what Paul is trying to speak to us about by referring to the passage in Luke 4, where Jesus, after doing wonderful and many wonderful healings in Capernaum, comes back to his hometown of Nazareth and uses the Isaiah chapter 61 passage to announce his ministry, his introduction to ministry. And I want to share a part of this encounter with you as a springboard to discuss why love is crucial as its primary motive to the ministry of any faith community. So reading out of Luke, the Spirit of the Lord, now Jesus is holding a scroll of Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to claim the year of the Lord's favor. Then he rolls up the scroll and hands it to be placed back into where it is kept, and sits down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began to say to them. Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son? They asked. And Jesus said to them, you will probably be asking me, do here in our hometown what we have heard that you have been doing in Capernaum. Well, that seems reasonable as a request. But now comes the zinger that gets Jesus in trouble in the synagogue. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. And yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath, in the region of Sidon. Now, Elijah is the most highly regarded of prophets. He is the man that was taken into heaven without dying on God's fiery chariot, and was also the man present with Moses when Jesus was having his experience on the Mount of Transfiguration. Scripture goes on and says, and there were many in Jerusalem with leprosy in the time of Elijah the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. Elijah was the handpicked prophet by Elijah. Also important, right? All of the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this, and they got up, drove him out of town, and took him to the brow of the hill which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But Jesus walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Jesus was pointing out that God's concern went beyond the in crowd, the Hebrews, the heirs of Abraham. The point that I'm wishing to make by the Luke reference is this: we by nature like the idea of love when it is done in the context that who we think deserves or warrants it is being loved. Those who are on the in list, our family members, our countrymen, people who believe the same way that we believe. When Jesus points out that the prophets were healing non-Hebrews, namely the Syrian leper and the Phoenician woman, while ignoring their own people, they were incensed to the point of wanting to kill Jesus. The letter to the Corinthian Christians comes out of a pastoral crisis. This is why Paul wrote it. People were not acting in love toward one another. They were using their spiritual gifts as yardsticks to measure one's worthiness, one's value, one's inclusion. These gifts that God had given were becoming divisive, exclusive. Love is not a spiritual gift. I want to help you understand that. It is the expression of how we use these gifts received from God. As I pointed out in last week's reflection, the church over time has separated itself from communities in which they are meant to serve. This is evident by our shrinking number of people who attend church nationally. There is a spiritual crisis in today's churches, and pastors all over the country are scratching their heads as to how to address this crisis. As a congregation, I've been encouraging you to participate in our visioning workshop that starts at the end of this month. And hopefully, there will be a large number of you who will be attending. Even visitors and non-members of this congregation are invited because you will help in directing the future ministry of this church. But I want you to ask yourselves, why do I find a visioning workshop important enough to schedule my valuable time to do this? The reality is, in order to sustain the ministry, we need to attract more people. Now, if our motive to reach out into Grand Island is based on survival, then it's never going to work, because that's the wrong motive. It is using God, so to speak, for our own selfish reasons. That's why the men in the synagogue got so upset with Jesus. They wanted to keep God in their own box, fashioning God into their will for their own use. How dare God bless people that we think of as enemies, as unworthy, as unclean, as animals. Yet God's love is such that there are no boundaries. Paul writes, "And if I were to be so generous as to give away everything that I own to feed the poor, without the pure motive of love, I would gain nothing of value." Our need to grow in numbers can never be based on a motive of survival. Our motive for growing, our motive for reaching out into Grand Island as a community should be based out of our abundance. Harambe, the idea of walking alongside of. And if you weren't here last week and don't know what I'm talking about, pick up last week's sermon. Learn about it. Harambe, that walking alongside, that mindset that none of us is above another, that we are all equal, that we need each other to move forward on life's journey. This is the message that Jesus tells us. It is the message that many people in our society are yearning to experience. If we are able to gain our vision with the understanding that we are called as disciples of Jesus to walk alongside, to share who we are with others, seeing each person as an equal, then we'll grow because we are reaching out for the right reasons. We will be doing God's will, for you see, love surpasses all. It surpasses faith. It surpasses hope. For it is through love that these two can exist and are cultivated. Our mission is not to survive. It is to walk alongside of, in love. For in the end, it is love that wins. Amen.